Hello and welcome into Big Ten Today. So glad to have you here alongside Anthony Herron. I'm Kylan Mills. We are just 2 weeks away from the kickoff to the college football season. That means fall is officially here. Anthony, what's your favorite part about the start to fall?
I'm sort of wearing my fall colors.
Okay, I like that.
Start to change a little bit. Things do dry up, but it does feel like football weather, and a lot of change is in the air.
A lot of changes in the air. I think the changing of the leaves is my favorite part. And then also quarterback situations coming to fruition.
Yes.
That's called a segue, folks, because that is today's big story. Ohio State head coach Ryan Day has officially named Kansas State transfer Will Howard as the starting quarterback. For K-State, he led the team to a Big 12 title in 2022, starting 28 games over there. Howard beat out Buckeyes returner Devin Brown, who had a strong spring and looked to be a serious challenger for the starting role. However, Day has said this week that Howard has really taken command of the offense, and he really praised the work he put in the offseason. All right, Anthony, so this is an Ohio State team that returns a ton of talent on both sides of the ball. Really, the big question mark was the quarterback position, and that's now answered. What do you make of this announcement that Howard is the guy?
So it's of course not shocking. Will Howard transfers in after the resume that he put together at Kansas State. Most of us anticipated this is the direction it would go. But the great thing about now the decision being made and announced is that Will Howard did have to step onto the practice field and earn it. And I do find it to be a bit of a misnomer where people discuss the transfer portal and just sort of assume that a guy transfers and the grass is always greener or something is like given to them when they show up. Will Howard showed up, yes. He came expecting to start, but he did have to beat out Devin Brown. He had to outperform several young, talented quarterbacks who were in the meeting room alongside him as well. So, yeah, he's a very experienced quarterback. He's a very talented quarterback. But I do like that he didn't step into a situation where he was immediately anointed the starter. That now galvanizes the locker room because they've seen him as their best option to win games. And we know the expectation is that the Buckeyes are taking the field expected to win every game.
That confidence going into week one has to go a long way. It is national championship or bust for this Buckeyes team. Now, they do have a new offensive coordinator in Chip Kelly, who is going to be working with Howard. What does Howard need to do for this offense to be successful, especially in the early going with the new, a little bit, at least some tweaks to the system?
I want to see him be as assertive as any Chip Kelly quarterback has been, because one of the things that Chip Kelly adds into things, we know that Ryan Day has usually had one of the most fantastic passing attacks in college football over the last handful of seasons. Chip Kelly historically has been one of the most creative run game minds in the sport. So you meld those two play calling philosophies together, and they know each other, trust each other well. Will Howard's goal will be to make sure he's as comfortable with the offense as he can be, as ingrained in the playbook as he can be. And when he steps onto the field, whether it's at the mesh point, reading for run, reading for pass, trying to feed the ball to a number of talented playmakers, that will put him in a position that he's never been in before. This is going to be the most talented offensive locker room. They won't huddle much. I was going to say offensive huddle. That's not necessarily a part of how they're going to operate, but he's going to be surrounded by more talent than he ever has been before. He's got to be assertive with how he attempts to get them to football, because the playmakers in Columbus are going to be able to snatch it away from defenders.
You mentioned Chip Kelly's creativity in terms of the schematics for a quarterback who's coming into a new situation. How do you want to simplify things to maybe not put too much on his plate, despite the fact that, yeah, you've got a lot of weapons, you've got so many offensive threats, but you don't want to maybe put too much on his shoulders?
That's where the experience that Will Howard has had in game can really be really important for Ohio State, for the Buckeyes offense, because he's seen a number of defenses all throughout college football. In the Big 12, it is a schematically diverse conference on defense. They're accustomed to, especially on the back end, a lot of moving pieces, and he's stepping into a Big 10 that's going to be as deep and diverse as this conference has ever been on defense. So for Chip Kelly, that relationship between Howard and Kelly and how they operate offensively, I think the main thing Chip Kelly will need to do that he's done with a number of quarterbacks before, you can run a very similar play, but add eye candy to it. And that's where the offense, led by the quarterback, Will Howard, can know that the play call is going to be very similar to a previous one, but then just add a little bit of a different motion to it. Add a little bit of a wrinkle with a formation that's slightly different. It keeps the defense on their toes, keeps them slightly off balance, and in doing that, the offense can still be comfortable knowing that there's only maybe a finite series or sequence of plays they're running, but just make it look a little bit different and then have all these weapons, all these speedy guys running all over the place, and that's where you can still have an opportunity to get into space.
Let's move on to the reigning national champions, because Michigan also has a big question mark surrounding their quarterback position. Alex Orji, Jack Tuttle, Davis Warren, all in the mix still at this point. According to the coaching staff, this is still a dead even race as of this week. What do you make of this QB competition?
It's an intriguing one, because for everyone in Ann Arbor, they've been accustomed to seeing where the last 3 years they've won Big Ten championships, and Cade McNamara trying to figure things out in Iowa City, and he was the one a few seasons ago that led them to that first of the 3 consecutive Big Ten titles. But then when you go beyond that, we know how productive J.J. McCarthy became as well. But for Alex Orji, he's the one who's sort of the presumed incumbent is going to be there. Can you have an incumbent backup? Because he was the backup last season and did get some reps, did get some run. Jack Tuttle's been banged up, and so being injured has really slowed the potential for him to be in the lineup. But Sharon Moore has been at Michigan, and he's seen the potential that they've shown in rotating quarterbacks in game. So I wouldn't be shocked if we see that. The issue is when Michigan has sort of been in betwixt quarterbacks before, they've had a light schedule early in the season. The way the Wolverines schedule begins early this year doesn't necessarily allow sort of that soft landing strip for a quarterback to step in who hasn't played much football. So if someone has solidified themselves as the best option, it'll probably behoove Sharon Moore to stick with that individual.
The schedule is such a huge challenge for teams across the Big Ten, with 18 schools now competing for that Big Ten title. In terms of Orji, I want to dive into more of his upside, because he's said to be one of the most athletic players on this team. What do you see his ceiling being at the quarterback position, and where does he have room for improvement?
So I do think there are some similarities between Alex Orji and J.J. McCarthy, because McCarthy was a guy who showed he was extremely mobile as a young quarterback, a little bit erratic at times as a passer, as a young playmaker. McCarthy didn't have to step in and be the full-time starter right off the bat, though, but Sharon Moore was there nurturing the skill set of J.J. McCarthy. And I do think that early on, because there's so much confidence in the offensive line for the Wolverines, and we know Donovan Edwards is a very gifted running back and playmaker, so they can utilize the legs of Alex Orji if he is the starter, for the early portion of the season. And I would say feel comfortable and confident that if for some reason he's not able to sustain in the lineup, you do have other talented players who could potentially step in as a backup option there also. But utilize the multi-dimensional skills that are brought to the table, because everything I'm hearing out of Ann Arbor, there's still some development that'll be necessary as a passer for Alex Orji early in the season, early in his career. He hasn't played a lot of football. So keep the passing tree very simple. Keep the whole playbook, somewhat condensed early. Figure out what he's most comfortable with executing in game. But then that's where the athletic ability he has can be something that gives you not just a schematic advantage against a defense, but things they can't plan for because of how that QB can go beyond the script.
Another thing that has to instill a lot of confidence in a somewhat inexperienced quarterback is the fact that Michigan defends extremely well, and they also can run the football. So maybe a little bit of insulation for a newcomer stepping into that role. Let's move on to Oregon. Not a question mark at the quarterback position, as we do know the Oklahoma transfer Dylan Gabriel will be the starter. Do you expect there to be any type of transition period with the resume he brings? Because this is a new face in a new place, despite the fact that he has impressive numbers, and the proof is in the pudding.
And he's just the player who was there before in Bo Nix did so much in 2 years as a starter, record-setting quarterback, and Dylan Gabriel comes in, and he has the opportunity to be a record setter in his own right because of all the football he's played at multiple institutions. Now on his third stop, getting to Eugene. What intrigues me about this QB room as much as anything, though, is that as gifted as Dylan Gabriel is, as productive as he's been throughout his career, and yes, he is the no-doubt starter, but there is a backup for the Ducks in Dante Moore that's now in his second institution that if for some reason they didn't feel like, Dylan Gabriel got banged up or they're blowing opponents out in games, there's a very exciting young talent in the QB room who stepped into Eugene knowing he was going to be the backup to Gabriel, and Dante Moore is going to be ready. He's going to prepare as the starter. And so when you have a team that's as talented as Oregon with the national championship expectations they bring into this thing, when you have the ability to say that, we really love the backup quarterback also. They're insulated in that way to a manner that a lot of other programs aren't. So it gives Oregon an advantage in that regard where they can be very aggressive with how they utilize the starter.
In terms of that depth of the quarterback position, there are some similarities with this Iowa team in a situation they haven't necessarily been in before in terms of there being a legitimate battle for the starting quarterback role, at least according to what we're hearing out of training camp so far. Cade McNamara, the returner, the presumed starter, it looked like initially, but Northwestern quarterback, or transfer rather, Brendan Sullivan supposedly has really been threatening from what you've seen in training camp film, from what you've heard. Who do you think is really going to take over and dominate that role?
I still anticipate Cade McNamara to be the starter for Iowa, but I do find it really intriguing that Kirk Ferentz has now been willing to say, or at least he's left it open-ended recently when asked about it, and they had the open practice in front of media and fans last week, and neither quarterback really lit things up, but Brendan Sullivan did have a very strong finish to that scrimmage. And Cade McNamara has been a Big Ten championship winning quarterback at Michigan. We know his resume is exceptional. He hasn't been able to stay healthy. So even if he's able to start, the last time he was a healthy quarterback for a full season was back in 2021 when, yes, he led the Wolverines to the college football playoff. But even if McNamara starts, you do know that resume of the last couple of seasons indicates he's been struggling to stay healthy, and that's where Brendan Sullivan can insulate that QB room. I called a game here on the Big Ten Network last season where Brendan Sullivan, he started against Maryland for Northwestern, threw for 265 yards, threw for 3 touchdowns, rushed for almost 60 yards in that game as well. So, I mean, that's not something he did every single week. But that level of production is within him. And that was a game where Maryland showed up in Evanston looking to try and solidify a bowl game. They could have had their 6th win. Northwestern took them down. The Northwestern offense, led by Brendan Sullivan, looked better that day than the Maryland offense did. So he's been productive in Big Ten football before. When you think back to the struggles with multiple backup quarterbacks for the Hawkeyes in recent years, it's been a big thing that's negated their ability to achieve at the highest level they can. Yes, they've won games, but the QB room in Iowa City is as fortified as it's been in quite some time.
To your point about McNamara's injury concerns, he's played in just 8 total games in the last 2 seasons. So certainly having a competent backup, at least we think he'll be the backup in Brendan Sullivan, poses very, very well for this Iowa offense moving forward under new offensive coordinator Tim Lester. So that'll be very exciting to see. Finally, want to touch on the 5-star who's going to be under center for Nebraska, and Dylan Raiola. This Nebraska team has to clean up the turnovers, leading the country with 31 last season. A lot of those were due to quarterback mistakes and ball security. Now you've got a freshman stepping into this role. What are your expectations for Raiola?
And we've seen that be such an issue for Nebraska for years at this point, where just protecting the football has been the main Achilles heel that the Huskers have had on offense. They've been able to be productive. They've been able to move the football. They've run it. At times they've thrown it through multiple regimes, but for whatever reason, even in Matt Rule's first season in Lincoln last year, they were not able to protect the football, whether it was Jeffrey Sims, whether it was Heinrich Harburg at QB. There were just so many turnovers. So now it intrigues me to have a true freshman potentially step in as the starter. Matt Rule, even though he hasn't officially named it yet, Dylan Raiola, by all reports, has been astronomically impressive with the way that he's handled himself, not only on the field, but off the field as well. The way he interacts with teammates, with staff, showing up at other sporting events. Like every beat writer I talk to just says this guy just sort of oozes charisma and leadership. I played against his dad in college. I played with his dad in the NFL. So I certainly understand the DNA that's there, the leadership that his dad Dominic showed, as a 14-year NFL center. So that seems to be within Dylan as well. And as impressive as he's been so far, I think Nebraska fans should be excited, but there is some anticipation the team will win at a higher level than we've seen them win at in a decade. Can you pull that off with a true freshman QB? It's a lot of expectations heaped onto a young guy.
Well, everything this coaching staff has said is that Raiola's maturity absolutely stands out, and he's really been able to come in and win over a locker room that is experienced. 7 returners, a little bit of an intimidating situation for a freshman to come into. Raiola so far has done an excellent job. We'll see, though, come week 1.